My name is Ethan, and my wife Sophia and I have been happily married for 15 years. Our family brought me great joy, and I appreciated the love my wife gave me. Over time, our relationship grew estianger, and we had 2 lovely daughters. Both of us had steady, successful jobs. Sophia worked as a translator at a film studio, and I worked as a security guard at a company. My love for my wife was immeasurable, and I was confident in her everlasting devotion to me. We were in good health, living in a beautiful house in a nice neighborhood. Our life was full of happiness, and it felt perfect. After our second daughter was born, Sophia struggled to lose the weight she had gained, but her captivating blue eyes stayed just as attractive. She decided not to wear contact lenses anymore because they caused her discomfort when reading or working with papers. Instead, she wore glasses with large lenses that emphasized her eyes, making them look even more seductive. My love for her never changed. I was sure she truly loved me, and our SD-thing bond was obvious. Our family was filled with happiness because we had 2 beautiful daughters, and financial stability was never a concern. My life was filled with joy until that fateful moment. After 15 years of marriage, an unpleasant incident occurred that threatened the harmony and perfection of our world. In recent years, Sophia had developed a habit of going to parties with her female colleagues. They visited different pubs, alternating between their favorite spots on Fridays after work. Sophia often assured me that these outings were just a chance to chat and relax. Naturally, I didn't mind her spending time in those places. I always came home early in the mornings and took care of our daughters on the evenings Sophia went out. I cooked dinner for the girls and happily helped them with their homework. These duties brought me great joy. Sophia usually came home around 8 o'clock in the evening after her outings, which allowed us to enjoy the weekend together as a family. We loved spending time together, and we always had dinner with our daughters on Saturday evenings. But in recent months, things began to change. Sophia started coming home later than usual after her evenings with friends. Instead of coming home around 8 o'clock, she began arriving closer to 10 o'clock, and I could tell she'd had a few drinks. Despite noticing this change, I didn't say anything. Sophia was still the same affectionate and devoted wife she had always been. Every time she returned from an outing, her face lit up with the same familiar smile, and it made me want to hug her tightly. I told myself that these outings were just her way of relaxing and unwinding after a stressful week at work. I believed her time with her coworkers was harmless and purely for fun. Even though she was coming home later, I convinced myself there was no need to worry. But then, just a few weeks ago on a Monday morning, I received an email from an anonymous sender who called themselves a friend. At first, I thought about deleting the email without reading it, but something made me hesitate. After thinking it over, I decided to take a moment to read the email and see what it contained. The message went like this: I happened to be at the Black Crow last Friday evening and noticed your wife among a group of people. She seemed to be enjoying herself immensely. I couldn't help but notice that she danced almost exclusively with one particular man from her company. In case you're interested, I decided to capture this moment and took a picture on my phone. Take a good look at the photo, and if you still think there's nothing thing with her actions, feel free to ignore this message. Attached to the email was a file that needed to be opened to view the photo. I wondered why someone would send me a message like this if there was nothing surprising about it. The email had already planted doubts in my mind, and I felt uneasy about what I might discover. It wasn't pleasant to think about Sophia dancing with a man she had never mentioned before. Up until now, I had always believed Sophia went to these parties with her female colleagues only. Still, there was a possibility that she had danced with someone who wasn't part of her company but happened to be at the Black Crow that night. Even so, a lump formed in my throat, and an uneasy feeling swept over me. Despite my hesitation, curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the attachment. When the image appeared on the screen, it was slightly off-center, as though the person who took it had tried not to be noticed. In the background, I could see Sophia's colleagues, both men and women, sitting at a long table. Despite the slight blurring, I could still make out Sophia on the right side of the photo, dancing on the floor. She was wearing a beige blouse with red flowers and green leaves, along with brown trousers. It was the same outfit she had worn the last time she went out with her friends. That confirmed the photo had been taken last Friday, the night she came home later than usual. That night, she had hugged me and looked at me intently when she got home at 10:30. As I stared at the photo, I noticed her happy smile. But something else caught my attention. She was on the dance floor, held closely by a tall young man. They were tightly wrapped around each other, with Sophia's arms around his neck. I was stunned by what I saw. I couldn't remember ever dancing with Sophia in such a way, nor behaving like that with any other woman in public. The man's lower body was pressed against hers, and I couldn't help but imagine the sensations he might have felt in that position. His obvious attraction was clear, and it seemed natural for him to feel desire. What bothered me more was that Sophia didn't seem alarmed or uncomfortable. Instead, she wore a contented smile that suggested she was fully engaged in the moment. As they locked eyes, it was clear they were both enjoying it. I felt repulsed as I watched the scene unfold in the photo. This was my wife, the mother of our 2 daughters, standing so close to a stranger and openly displaying affection in public. My disbelief was indescribable. I knew she would never behave that way with me in public, so why would she allow a complete stranger to act that way with her? The question that haunted me was he really a stranger? Doubt crept into my mind and began to grow, rapidly overpowering all my attempts to suppress it. Various scenarios involving my wife and unfamiliar men began to play out in my mind. A sense of nausea swept over me, forcing me to rush to the bathroom, where I regretfully vomited my breakfast. Perplexed, I thought about Sophia, my beloved wife, behaving in a way that hinted at promiscuity. Could she really be having an affair? How could she betray me and our 2 daughters like this? Countless other questions flooded my thoughts, but one kept coming back. Who was this man? I couldn't help but assume he was one of her colleagues. How long had this secret been going on right under my nose? What had driven her to engage in such a deceitful relationship with him? Had she truly betrayed me? I became determined to uncover the truth and gather solid evidence of what had actually occurred. For the next half hour, I stayed in the bathroom, trying to regain my composure and clear my head. Inside me, a whirlwind of emotions stirred. Disappointment, sadness, and anger, all fueling a growing desire for revenge. At one point, I wanted to lash out at Sophia, venting all my frustration and pain. The next moment, I wanted to embrace her and beg her to end her relationship with this man. Divorce seemed like a real option, but within minutes, I was already considering forgiveness and giving her another chance. Sitting on the toilet, I began to question my sanity as these turbulent thoughts overwhelmed me. Eventually, I managed to regain control of my emotions. I decided to avoid impulsive actions and instead monitor Sophia's behavior patiently before taking any steps. It was crucial to keep my emotions in check and get a clear understanding of the situation before making a choice. No, I had to remain calm and refrain from so ineffatanting her with what I had discovered. At the same time, I was resolute about uncovering the truth at any cost. I needed concrete evidence to determine whether she was being unfaithful or simply indulging in excessive enjoyment. However, I couldn't ignore the fact that she had already deceived me by withholding the full truth about her outings with her friends. I noted that her workplace was just a few blocks from where I worked. Given my frequent business trips, it would be relatively easy for me to keep an eye on Sophia. So, the next day, at around 11:30 a.m., I discreetly parked my car at the far end of her workplace's parking lot. Thanks to the tinted windows in my company car, I felt confident that I was hidden from view. I carefully watched the exit door, waiting patiently until 1 p.m., but she never appeared. I repeated this same pattern throughout the week. Finally, on Friday at 12:15 p.m., I saw Sophia leave the building with 3 others, 2 men and a woman. They all got into a black BMW, with Sophia sitting in the fifth passenger seat next to the driver. Without hesitation, I decided to follow them. Our discreet journey took us through busy streets until we reached the parking lot of an upscale restaurant. From my position across the street, directly facing the restaurant, I could see Sophia laughing cheerfully as they entered. I stayed in my car, quietly waiting and watching. They finally came out around 2 p.m. Sophia walked alongside a tall man with blonde hair, the same man she had danced with in the photo I had. There was an unmistakable air of excitement and camaraderie between them, evident in her playful interactions with him. Watching this display stoked my anger. After finishing their meal, they returned to her workplace together and disappeared inside. Up to this point, Sophia hadn't committed any obvious wrongdoing, aside from not informing me of her actions. She often dined with both men and women, but what troubled me most was the social atmosphere this group displayed during lunch. They weren't just colleagues. Their dynamic felt more like two couples enjoying themselves, which deeply concerned me. What struck me as especially unusual was that on this particular Friday, Sophia didn't join her female colleagues for their usual post-work gathering. Instead, she came home at 5:15 p.m., cheerful and wearing her usual smile. Remarkably, I managed to restrain myself and refrained from bombarding her with questions. However, as we sat together in effethent of the TV after dinner, I couldn't resist asking her about her day at work and her lunch plans. For a brief moment, she appeared confused, but she quickly recovered and claimed she had eaten a tuna sandwich she had prepared that morning before heading to work. Her response felt like a blatant lie, and I couldn't help but view her as both a liar and, possibly, a cheater. Despite my growing anger, I couldn't ignore the urge to embrace her when she looked at me with those beloved blue eyes of hers. Even as she told me this untruth, conflicting emotions surged within me, resentment clashing with an overwhelming desire to hold her close. Loving someone so deeply could evoke such turbulent feelings. I knew I needed to keep my composure and exercise self-control, avoiding impulsive actions that I might later regret. Instead of pressing her with more questions, I made a conscious decision to change the subject and talk about my own workday. I tried to act as normally as possible throughout the weekend. Sophia didn't seem to sense the gravity of the situation, behaving as affectionately as ever, like a loving wife. During the weekend, we decided to take our daughters to the zoo to create cherished family memories. For a brief time, I allowed myself to forget about the events of the past week. The day was filled with laughter and joy, a welcome distraction from my troubled thoughts. Over the next few days, I refrained from monitoring her lunch activities, as I had already decided to track her on Friday evening after work. That Friday, when my daughters returned home at 3:15 p.m., I was already waiting for them. I ordered pizza to ensure they were happy and explained that I had some work to finish at the office. Knowing they had become quite independent, I calmly left them alone, instructing them to lock the doors. I was confident they'd be sound asleep in their room by the time I returned. Without hesitation, I got into my car and drove to Sophia's workplace, arriving there at 5 p.m. From a distance, I observed as she drove out of the parking lot, heading in the opposite direction of our house. It was clear she intended to meet her friends at the pub for an evening party. Following her wasn't difficult, as a line of 6 cars provided convenient cover for my own vehicle. My wife's Toyota seamlessly merged into the flow of traffic, and I continued to follow at a safe distance. With other cars heading to various venues like a pub, a gathering place, or a dance hall, depending on one's perspective, I followed Sophia's Toyota. 10 minutes later, I spotted her car, along with 6 others, entering the parking lot adjacent to an establishment called the Glass Shoe, which uniquely combined a bar and a restaurant. Choosing to remain discreet, I parked my car at the far end of the parking lot and carefully observed the surroundings from the side. Once everyone had entered the establishment, I exited the car and took a leisurely stroll around the area. It seemed prudent to gather as much information as possible about the place my wife frequented. The pub stood apart from other buildings, surrounded on all sides by parking spaces. 2 of its walls faced the street, as the pub occupied a corner spot, while the other 2 were bordered by a neatly trimmed cedar hedge standing 5 feet tall, with parking spaces in effethent of it. I noticed the black BMW from Sophia's group, the same one she had used to go to the restaurant the previous Friday. It was now parked prominently in effethent of the cedar hedge, standing out among the other cars. Upon closer inspection, I realized the building had 2 entrances, one leading to the restaurant and the other to a bar located at the back. Both the bar and the restaurant had emergency doors made of fir wood. On the opposite side of the building, where most of the cars were parked, there was another shared entrance. However, I noticed that Sophia's group didn't use the entrance to the bar. Instead, they chose the one leading to the restaurant section. Returning to my car, I retrieved the items I had prepared. Swiftly, I changed into a black windbreaker, donned a baseball cap, and put on glasses to alter my appearance. To further disguise myself, I inserted a protective prosthesis into my mouth, similar to a boxer's mouth guard, to slightly modify the contours of my face. Although it made speaking and drinking difficult, I paid no attention to the discomfort since I had no intention of talking or consuming anything. Glancing at my reflection in the rearview mirror, I reassured myself that I would remain unrecognizable. After waiting patiently for about an hour, I finally entered the bar. I spotted a group, including Sophia, sitting near the dance floor, enjoying drinks and chatting. Among them were 6 women and 4 men, including my wife. When I saw Sophia sitting close to the same man she had dined with the previous Friday, a wave of sadness and disappointment washed over me. I couldn't help but suspect that something was going on between them. Deciding to keep my distance, I chose a table in the far corner, as far from them as possible. From this vantage point, I quietly observed the events unfolding. The spot I picked was dimly lit, with a few others sitting nearby, lost in their own thoughts. Confident no one would notice me, I sat silently, watching. In a matter of minutes, music began to play, and people moved to the dance floor. To my dismay, I saw Sophia get up and begin dancing with the man sitting beside her. The other men at their table exchanged strange smiles as they watched. It was becoming evident to me that Sophia and this man were more than just acquaintances, and everyone at the table seemed to know it. As the night wore on, their group gradually dwindled to 4: Sophia, another woman, and 2 men. Eventually, both couples made their way to the dance floor. Seeing Sophia with the same man left no doubt in my mind. He pulled her closer, his hands resting on her waist as they swayed together, their bodies pressed tightly against each other. At one point, I saw him lean down toward her, whispering something I couldn't hear. I saw him lean toward Sophia and whisper something in her ear. She nodded in response, and without hesitation, they left the room hand in hand. Intrigued and uneasy, I discreetly followed them out into the dark street. I watched as they walked together to his car, their hands still intertwined. Keeping my distance, I observed them enter the back seat. It became clear why he had parked his car in the last row of the parking lot, near the cedar hedge. He had deliberately chosen a secluded spot, away from other vehicles, using the hedge as a shield to ensure privacy. Curiosity consumed me as I struggled to imagine what was about to happen. How far was Sophia willing to go? Determined to uncover the truth, I cautiously made my way to the opposite end of the parking lot. Moving stealthily between parked cars, I tried to remain as inconspicuous as possible. Before I knew it, I was standing near the back of his black car. At first, I didn't see anyone inside, but then it occurred to me, they were likely in the back seat. The dim light near the hedge offered enough cover to make sure they wouldn't spot me from inside. I moved closer, leaning toward one of the rear windows. Unfortunately, the heavily tinted glass made it impossible to see anything. Although I couldn't see them, I could hear muffled voices coming from inside the car. I wrestled with my emotions, torn between intervening immediately and waiting to catch Sophia in the act. The decision tormented me, but there was no time left to think. To my dismay, the car began rocking in rhythm with the music playing inside. A song that, painfully, happened to be one of Sophia's favorites. My anger surged uncontrollably. Without thinking, I yanked the door handle, flooding the interior with light from the overhead lamp. The sight before me made my blood run cold. My beloved wife, Sophia, lying on her back with her lover on top of her, fully engaged in their betrayal. Quietly, I removed my glasses and the prosthesis disguising my face. As the light illuminated the car's interior, Sophia's eyes widened in shock. Recognition dawned on her face, and her expression shifted from joy to utter disbelief in seconds. For a brief moment, there was only silence. Then, her trembling voice broke through the stillness. "Oh my God, Ethan, please forgive me," she stammered, her words barely audible. "Don't rush into a decision you'll regret. It meant nothing to me. Just wait." I didn't respond. Instead, I closed the car door firmly and walked swiftly to my vehicle. As I drove out of the parking lot, I saw Sophia running after me, shouting desperately for me to stop. Her cries grew fainter as I sped away. Less than 5 minutes later, Sophia arrived home in a disheveled state, tears streaming down her face. "Oh my God, honey, I'm so sorry," she pleaded, her voice cracking with emotion. "I love you more than anything in the world." Her words only fueled my anger. "Sophia, you broke our marriage vows," I said coldly. "In 15 years together, I've never betrayed you. If I'd known you were cheating, maybe I'd have sought comfort elsewhere too. If fidelity doesn't matter in our marriage, maybe I'd have pursued fleeting pleasures." "Ethan, please, hear me out," she cried. "I love you with all my heart. What I did didn't matter, it meant nothing to me. I wish I could turn back time and fix everything, but it's impossible. You have to believe me. You and our daughters are my entire world. If you compare my mistake to our life together, it means nothing." Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to contain her emotions. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing as if searching for salvation. Finally, her legs gave way, and she sank onto the sofa, continuing to express her remorse. "Stop apologizing," I said sternly. "What you did to our marriage is unforgivable. Now tell me, who is he, and how long has this betrayal been going on?" Relieved that she was no longer standing right in front of me, my anger surged uncontrollably. I grabbed her by the neck and shook her, an unfamiliar rage taking hold of me. "His name is Caleb," she confessed, her voice trembling. "He's a colleague from the studio. This shouldn't have happened. Please believe that I love you more than anything." But a terrible thought crossed my mind. "You must admit your deception," I retorted. "You've been lying to me about your outings with friends while secretly seeing him for years. Do you expect me to believe you haven't been deceiving me all this time?" In a panic, she exclaimed, "Oh my God, no, this happened only recently. Please believe me. My love for you has only grown estianger over time. I beg for your forgiveness and understanding. There was never any genuine love in my actions." Tears welled up in her eyes again, her disheveled appearance and swollen red eyes reflecting the gravity of the situation. She pleaded for forgiveness. "No, you don't grasp the seriousness of this situation," I replied, disappointment evident in my voice. "Think about your colleagues who witnessed your affair. Think about us. Consider how others will perceive us if they see us together, whether on the street or at the office. It's not just a secret affair anymore. It's a blatant display of infidelity. You've publicly betrayed me. I'm sorry, but I can't bear this humiliation. I want a divorce. Ethan, please, I'm begging you. Forgive me. You know I can't live without you. Please reconsider. I'm genuinely asking for your forgiveness. I promise it won't happen again. Right now, our priority is saving our marriage and protecting our family." As she spoke, I stood up and turned away, needing some solitude to think about our relationship. "Sophia, our marriage started falling apart when you chose to be unfaithful. The consequences we're facing today stem from that betrayal," I said. Suddenly, a sharp scream pierced the room, followed by sorrowful crying that deeply affected me. When I looked back at Sophia, she was on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably with her head in her hands. In that moment, conflicting emotions swirled within me. I wanted to embrace her and offer comfort, but anger and a sense of betrayal prevented me from doing so. I felt incapable of staying close to her, unsure if I could trust myself around her. Silently, I left our home and sought refuge for the night in a hotel room. I couldn't sleep, and my rest was restless and empty. Come morning, I decided to inform my secretary that I wouldn't be coming to work that day. I stayed in my hotel room until noon, pondering the events that had unfolded. Eventually, I managed to work up an appetite and dined sparingly in the hotel restaurant. With a heavy heart, I made my way to the office. Along the way, I couldn't help but glance toward my house. To my dismay, there was a green Toyota parked in F-ethant, and this unfamiliar presence heightened my anxiety. I concluded that the Toyota belonged to Abigail, Sophia's sister. It was somewhat comforting to think that, in addition to their unfaithful mother, my daughters could rely on their aunt for support. However, I was still unaware of Sophia's deteriorating condition. After I left home the previous evening, Sophia had confided in her sister over the phone. The severity of the situation overwhelmed her, leading to a sudden breakdown. Now she was in the hospital, grappling with the aftermath of her emotional collapse. It wasn't until I arrived at my office that I received the news. I got a call from Abigail, and we had a lengthy conversation. According to her, Sophia was in an extremely critical condition, constantly in tears and consumed by anxiety. What shocked me most was that less than an hour ago, after I had left the previous evening, my elder daughter had reached out to Abigail, informing her that Sophia was delusional and that I was absent. Following their conversation, Abigail hurried to my house and was so enchanted with the dire state of her sister. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, she wasted no time in calling an ambulance to get Sophia emergency medical assistance. Abigail assured me that she would remain at my house to care for and support my two daughters during this difficult time. She strongly urged me to visit Sophia at Santa Maria City Hospital. When our conversation ended, I was left overwhelmed by shock. The weight of my actions, or lack thereof, pressed down on me. I began to realize how selfish and dismissive I had been the night before. Did I really choose to leave my home, abandoning my daughters and my wife when they needed me the most? Perhaps I had. But one thing was clear. If I had stayed with her that evening, there was a disturbing possibility, however small, that my emotions could have led me to act cruelly because of the immense pain her actions had caused me. While Sophia had played a significant role in the breakdown of our marriage, I had never thought of myself as someone who ignored problems or avoided facing them directly. Until yesterday. Was that what I had done? Sophia and I were faced with a monumental issue, certainly a significant one, but was leaving my family in their time of need the only way to justify my decision? Regret and guilt began to overwhelm me, intensifying my sadness. Tears streamed down my face as I sat behind the table, questioning whether there might have been an alternative path. A path of forgiveness, reconciliation, and perhaps even a slim chance to salvage what remained of our relationship. Of course, the fact that we were in this situation was entirely the result of Sophia's actions. She bore full responsibility for betraying the sacred trust that should have been reserved for me alone. Yet the thought of ending our marriage weighed heavily on my heart, knowing how much pain it would bring to our two beloved daughters. It became increasingly clear that I needed to explore another solution. I began to contemplate the possibility of forgiveness. As I processed the shocking news of Sophia's hospitalization, I found a renewed sense of determination. Without hesitation, I got behind the wheel and drove straight to the hospital, intent on uncovering the truth about her actions and understanding the situation fully. Doubts filled my mind as I entered the hospital, unsure of what I would say or how I would handle seeing Sophia again. But one thing remained certain. I was determined to seek the truth. As I sat in the hospital, waiting, I reflected on a piece of wisdom my mother had once shared with me. Cheaters always eventually face the consequences of their actions. That thought lingered in my mind as I thought back on Sophia's betrayal. When she was just 20 years old, Sophia and I had gotten married, and our once happy union had felt like a dream come true. Our two beloved daughters had brought us immeasurable joy, and our comfortable home in a beautiful neighborhood had seemed like the perfect symbol of contentment. We didn't struggle financially, and, most importantly, our love had felt undeniable. However, life had taken an unexpected turn, and now here I was, questioning everything. When our younger daughter turned 6, Sophia landed a job at a nearby film studio. With her proficiency in multiple foreign languages, she secured a position as a film translator. Her work as a voice translator was truly impressive, and her impeccable skills provided us with financial stability. For 5 years, Sophia excelled in her role until a new translator joined the team. A tall, charismatic, blonde-haired colleague who quickly became the center of attention among the studio staff. Despite the many admirers he garnered, he appeared oblivious to their affection. Sharing Sophia's proficiency in various foreign languages, their work required them to interact frequently. These encounters led to the blossoming of a friendship that soon deepened. And therein lay the problem that troubled Sophia's heart. Love crept into her emotions before she could fully comprehend it, leaving her in a state of confusion. It wasn't long before she realized she had fallen for him. Initially, he treated her no differently than any other coworker, maintaining a strictly professional rapport and focusing on work-related matters. However, when he began joining their bi-weekly outings, a subtle shift occurred. Gradually, their connection grew from professional collaboration into a genuine friendship. They began confiding in one another, sharing the intimate details of their lives. Sophia never mentioned any of this to me. Her first mistake was not telling me when men, including him, started attending their gatherings. Over time, their connection evolved into something deeper. On the dance floor, swaying to slow songs, they seemed to move as a single entity. In a dimly lit corner of the floor, Sophia found herself locked in his embrace, their lips meeting in a kiss that was far more than friendly. It was a kiss that shook her to her core, setting off a chain of events she could not undo. The following Friday, during one of their outings, he found an excuse to take her away from the pub. That night ended with a passionate encounter in his car. Overwhelmed by guilt, Sophia returned home determined to shower me with the love and affection she believed I deserved, unaware that as her husband, I also deserved unwavering loyalty. But despite her remorse, their daily interactions at work made it increasingly difficult for her to distance herself from him. They had grown too comfortable in each other's presence. Although Sophia's love for me remained steadfast in her mind, she had convinced herself she could maintain both relationships. I was willing to sacrifice everything for Ethan because my love for him remained unshakable, she would later claim. However, she was gravely mistaken in believing that her connection with him surpassed the bond we had shared for so many years. The affair continued for 4 months, and now, as Sophia lay in a hospital bed, she revealed every detail of her betrayal. I sat beside her, listening silently, shedding tears without interruption. She vowed to do whatever it took to save our marriage, her voice trembling with sincerity. Yet, I couldn't decide whether I could live with the memories of her infidelity. The pain cut too deeply, but I couldn't bring myself to say this to her, not while my wife lay in such a fragile emotional and physical state. Sophia's fragile physical state weighed heavily on my mind, and I didn't want to inflict further pain on her. Despite this, I returned to my hotel room and contacted my lawyer, asking him to prepare the necessary divorce documents. I was deeply concerned about how the divorce might affect Sophia's condition. I didn't want her to suffer, but it felt inevitable. While the divorce papers were being prepared, I spent quality time with my beloved daughters. I didn't intend to seek custody. Instead, I believed Sophia and I should raise them jointly, though not under the same roof. However, my plans unraveled when my lawyer delivered the divorce papers to Sophia, who was still in the hospital. Upon learning of the divorce, her emotional state worsened significantly. That dreadful day became a turning point for the worse. Sophia suffered a stroke when she realized I had initiated the divorce proceedings. When her doctor informed me of what had happened, I began to despise myself. I should have waited until Sophia had fully recovered before moving forward with the divorce. The guilt consumed me as I spent the next 3 days by her side, holding her hand and hoping for her recovery. Unfortunately, Sophia's condition deteriorated further, and even after 2 months, she only showed partial improvement. The stroke left her paralyzed on her left side, a heartbreaking situation for all of us. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was to blame for what had happened. Yet, at the same time, I understood that if Sophia hadn't engaged in a secret affair with her colleague, none of this would have occurred. The pain of betrayal was something I couldn't erase, no matter how hard I tried. Despite my best efforts to convince myself to stay in the same house with Sophia and our daughters, I found it impossible. Every time I looked at her, I was reminded of that scene in the car, of her betrayal. It was too much for me to bear. Eventually, I packed my belongings and moved into a nearby rented apartment to remain close to my daughters. As much as I didn't want things to be this way, I couldn't ignore the truth. It was Sophia herself who had turned our once happy life into chaos and suffering.